Hello, 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 and welcome one and all to this edition of the Jolly Heretic. Now, a very interesting paper has come to my attention. There seems to be one a week at the moment, and because it's a very interesting paper, of course, it is an interesting paper about which there are complaints. It's the kind of interesting paper. Hello, Nimble Horse. Cheers. It's the kind of interesting paper that has aroused the ire of the anti-science lobby because it is simply so interesting. And this paper is in Nature Communications, which is quite a prestigious journal to have an interesting paper in. And needless to say, because it is a prestigious journal, it has aroused the ire of the anti-science woke lobby, and they are. And when you go into it, there's a marker saying this paper is subject to dispute. And this paper is called "Tracking Historical Changes in Trustworthiness Using Machine Learning Analyses of Facial Cues in Paintings" by Lou Safra et al. It's extremely interesting. And what it basically argues is that social trust is very important. Social trust is connected to nice outcomes, good economic performance, lower crime rates, that sort of thing. And so consequently, as people become more trusting and as social trust becomes more important, you would expect people who are high up in the society to be more trustworthy, to have more sort of trustworthy faces. You would expect people who are artists to flatter the rich people who they were painting by making them seem to have more trustworthy faces, and you would expect the people that were commissioning the paintings to want to be perceived as being more trustworthy and to therefore unconsciously convey facial expressions which made them look more trustworthy, because increasingly, as the society essentially becomes more cage strategist, then trust will become more important, and therefore that will be expressed in the nature of the paintings. And what they did is absolutely fascinating. They used machine learning to come up with certain physical traits, such as a smile, such as eyebrows being a certain shape, such as the face being a certain shape, such as the face being a certain width, this kind of thing. And they looked at these traits and they showed how much they are associated with trust and with trusting people. And what they showed was that across time, looking at portraits in the National Gallery in Britain between 1500 and the year 2000, the degree of trustworthiness in portraits, remember this is the computer that's analysed this, has increased. And this increase is paralleled by, of course, a decline in interpersonal violence, and a decline in interpersonal violence suggests increasing trust. And by hello everybody, hello Joel, hello Dick Martino, hello Kit. Oh, get on entropy. Oh God, yes. Thank you for reminding me. Sorry, yes, I've got to sign into the old entropy. Okay, forgive me if that results in a bit of boomer tech stuff, because you can never really know what's going to happen with entropy. I'll just sign in there. Okay, thank you for reminding me. Okay, I've signed into the old entropy. Okay, sorry about that. Yes. I'm sorry, I'm so absorbed in the paper. And so, yes, so it uses this algorithm anyway to evaluate the trustworthiness in the paintings between 1500 and the year 2000. And what it shows is that across time, using a large sample of these paintings, the people's faces have become more trustworthy. Now, of course, what this means is they are deliberately and consciously conveying signals of trust rather than signals of being, I don't know, well-art, or signals of being tough, or whatever else it happens to be. And people are deliberately painting them in such a way that they look more trustworthy. Hello, Shit Grinder. Hello, Carlotta. Hello, everybody. Hello, Emblematic. Hello, Exo. Hello. And so they are deliberately painting them in such a way that they look more trustworthy in order to flatter them or whatever. And this increases across time. And it's actually really interesting, because I was a sort of a pet hobby of mine is history. And if you think about it, we've had very realistic paintings for quite a long time. There's a sort of sudden change that seems to happen around about the Renaissance, possibly paralleling us becoming rather more intelligent, rather more quickly, perhaps because of the Black Death, where we suddenly get a lot better at painting. And so it's round about the time of the Renaissance that, for the first time ever, really, we know with a reasonable degree of accuracy what historical figures look like. We know what, for example, Thomas Cromwell looked like, or Thomas Cranmer looked like, or Henry VIII, or whatever. These people that were knocking around in the early 16th century, because we have realistic portraits of them. And what he showed was the portrait of Thomas Cranmer. And if any of you are familiar with Thomas Cranmer, Google him. He was the person that basically brought Anglicanism to England. And the portrait of Thomas Cranmer is low in trust. and this is marked by the shape of the eyes, by the shape of the nose, by the fact that he's not smiling, and by the fact that he has this sort of certain face shape, which is quite sort of masculine looking, and which the computer algorithm decided is negatively associated with being with trustworthiness, basically. And as you move forward to the 19th century, when we've been under this selection, this case selection, really, this group selection for being trustworthy, for a very long time, which is just fascinating because I've absolutely no idea what your second email to me was. I really don't know. He looks like me. Well, perhaps he does. So perhaps I'm not particularly trustworthy. I don't know. But anyway, the second painting that he compares it to is a painting of somebody called William something or other, and William Devis. It's Matthew Wood, someone called Matthew Wood, who looks a bit like Horatio Nelson. And what you basically find by this stage, interestingly, is that portraits do actually start to look rather less like the people looked. And portraits increasingly, so whereas with the Renaissance, what they're going for is realism, they want the people to look like what they look like, you find this less and less. They don't actually comment on this in the paper, but you find this less and less as you move through time, because portraits are increasingly painted to a romantic ideal, if everyone's familiar with the Blackadder reference, where Baldrick says that portraits all look the same these days because they're painted to a romantic ideal rather than a faithful representation of the idiosyncratic facial features of the person in question. And that's what you increasingly find. They're painted to a romantic ideal. And that romantic ideal, you'll see these pictures of the Duke of Wellington, of Nelson, of all these people around the 18th century. They all basically look the same. So anyway, I think this is absolutely amazing. And so what they found, as I say, was that they do get more trustworthy across time. And they show, I got a graph there that parallels the GDP per capita with the computed level of trustworthiness of these paintings. And the parallel is extremely strong, particularly from around the year 1800 onwards, so from around the year of the Industrial Revolution. Interestingly, what they also show is that the this is absolutely extraordinary, and they go it all together, and it's a jolly interesting paper. Now, obviously, this is unlikely to be a failure of peer review in the sense that this is Nature, this is a highly prestigious journal, so it's going to have extremely high standards in terms of getting a paper in this journal. It's extremely difficult to get a paper in this journal, so only tip-top academic stuff is going to get in this journal. And B, because it's a prestigious journal, it's the kind of journal that the Spiteful Mutants will go for. Remember, the Spiteful Mutant is spiteful because he gets into a position of power and negatively influences society. They're not particularly interested in taking over journals like the Mankind Quarterly or whatever. They're interested in taking over journals that have power and prestige, or where the results will be reported on in newspapers. And so they've probably managed to do that to a significant degree. So that would imply that this was so good, this paper, that its logic was so rigorous that it was very, very difficult for these midwits that would object to it for ideological reasons to destroy it, and so it therefore kind of got through the net, basically, and it managed to be published. And so therefore you have this paper that demonstrates that there is a relationship between facial traits and personality traits. B, that a computer algorithm, so we're not talking about a human here, we're talking about something much more intelligent than a human, can pick up on these traits, can be programmed to recognize these traits, and can pick up on these traits and recognize these traits in paintings. And C, that across time, the expression of these traits, both for reasons of politics or whatever, but also for reasons of simply the nature of people and the nature of people that are in positions of power in society, who are representative of that society being painted, presumably changing, is going up, which is consistent with the selection pressure for people that are case strategists, for people that are highly group selected, and whatever. And so this is what is going on. They prefer the term Goldilocks wit, Max Martha. I shall think about that one. Goldilocks wits. Yes, I suppose they have. They have got it just right, haven't they? They've got it just right. They've got the balance just right to obtain positions of power and seem like they're reasonably intelligent and seem like they know what they're doing, but and get all basically the good consequences of being involved in science and academia without any of the potentially negative consequences. So I suppose you could call them Goldilocks wits. So that's a very good point. Anyways, it's an interesting paper anyway. And of course, what they and it shows. I've done this book, How to Judge People by What They Look Like. and it showed, and I've looked at all of the evidence for the veracity of physiognomy, and this, of course, demonstrates very, very clearly the veracity of physiognomy. I mean, it demonstrates that you can't just dismiss it as phrenology or whatever. It demonstrates that physiognomy is true, that there is an extent to which you can judge people by what they look like, and in particular, you can do this using people's faces. Now, this has, of course, aroused the anger of the woke mob. And their only argument is basically, this is phrenology, phrenology's evil, phrenology's Victorian, Victorian's evil, Victorian's racist, Victorian's bad, this paper is a failure of peer review, there are small sample sizes, there are whatever minor things that would have been peer reviewed, by the way, and that would have got through peer review, and this isn't good enough, and we don't like it, and that's basically their counter argument. And consequently, the supine idiots at the journal Nature are I did write a book on this, Cardrassi. Yes, you can find a link to all my books that are on Amazon in the link below this video, and that book was called How to Judge People by What They Look Like. Anyway, so yes, they are getting very, very upset about this, as you would expect. And causing a stink. I don't know if they're going to, be pathetic and withdraw the paper, or allow them to. One of the things they do is they allow the woke mob, if the woke mob doesn't like a paper and they haven't got enough reason to withdraw it, is they allow them to write a response to it. That's what happened with Nathan Coffness and my paper. He was allowed to write a response to it, even though he helped review the original paper. But anyway, and then you're not allowed to write a response back. Normally, if somebody writes a response to your paper, you're allowed to write a counter response, and it ends with you. You get the last word because it's your paper. But no, it doesn't work like that. If it's a woke viewpoint, if it doesn't pass queer review, then you don't get to respond back. So that's the situation with that. And the other thing that somebody got in contact with me about, which I thought I'd like to tell you before I move on to the super chats that you've very kindly been sending, it's from a chap on Twitter who has sent me in a question, and he sent me in a question about race differences in the magnitude of sex differences in intelligence. And there is some evidence that I've found using samples from Saudi Arabia that there is no sex difference in intelligence among that sample, or at least no significant difference. Now, what you might expect to find is that we know that there are race differences in the extent of sexual dimorphism. So the races that are among the most sexually dimorphic are whites and Greenlandic. The races that are the least sexually dimorphic are like blacks. Now, why would they be the least sexually dimorphic in terms of physicality? Well, being our strategists, it's because the men basically just pump and dump, and consequently the females have to take on some of the sort of male roles, and consequently it pays for them to be more masculinized. They're all evolved to a more unstable and dangerous ecology, so they all have to be more masculinized. In a context like that, there's less niche splitting, and there's less niche splitting even between the sexes. And so again, you're going to get a smaller difference between the sexes, because the sexes are all doing basically more similar things. And so consequently, the level of sexual dimorphism in blacks is lower, and the level and the degree to which black women are feminine compared to black men is lower. And I found this in sports, that the race differences in sport, in sporting ability between women of different races are less pronounced and less obvious than with men. So you get hardly any black people who are shot putters, but you get black women that are successful shot putters. At the other extreme, if it's a highly K-oriented ecology, then you get a high degree of niche splitting and whatever, and therefore the women end up doing very different things from the men, because the men are the hunters and the women are looked after and they're the gatherers, and so you end up with this increasing difference. And then with the East Asians, you might possibly get a smaller difference in some ways than with whites. Because there is less sexual dimorphism, because there is less sexual selection for physical differences, because they are selecting more for the mind, and therefore they might be less physically different, though they could be more mentally different. Now, what we find here in terms of the differences is actually quite consistent with this. So the biggest mental difference is between whites. This is on the SAT maths test. There's a difference of 32 points between white females and white males. Hispanics 27 points. Asians 24 points. though I wonder if that is confounded by the fact that Asian mixes different categories. It mixes South Asian and East Asian. American Indian 25 points, and blacks only 8 points. So you have this very, very small difference between blacks on the maths SAT, and that would make sense because you would expect the level of black sexual dimorphism to be the lowest of all. They should be the least sexually dimorphic because of these being highly R selected in these different selection pressures. They shouldn't be that different really, and you would expect them to be the least mentally sexually dimorphic, and that is what these data find. Now, I wasn't familiar with those, I think that's very, very interesting finding. So I thought I would share that with you.